Hello and welcome again. We're in the studio with Walter and Sonica Veith, listening to them recount their life story and how God has led them in the past. Now, we've heard about your childhood, we've heard about your early married life, we've heard about your conversion, and how Bible prophecy played a very large role in that, Daniel 7 in particular. We learned about the occult occurrences in your home, in your early married life, and about how these things continued on even though you were already Adventist Christians. And then we heard about your dairy farm and how you started up as new Christians with a whole new plan. But it wasn't easy for you. You had a lot of trials and opposition from neighbors and even just things that happened on your farm that would have discouraged most people. Why do you think God allowed these things to happen to you in your life as new Christians, to bother you and to just try to discourage you? As a matter of fact, you'd think that after being a Christian, God would make your life smooth. You'd given up so much for Him, you'd sacrificed, you were trying to be faithful, obey His commandments, and yet everything was going wrong.
Well, that's what we thought as well. When we started keeping the commandments, we thought, wow, the Lord's blessing us. We had a beautiful wheat crop, and then everything started going wrong. So we had to go back to the Bible. The Bible says, in this life you will have trials, and He didn't come to bring us a bed of roses. We will have to go through trials, and the trials are there to strengthen us and to prepare us for other things that will come. So
things will get worse.
It will get
much worse before they get better.
I think God had a purpose for you, but it required special training.
Yeah,
I think so.
So now, even after you were Christians, yet the devil still played a role in your lives through your father. Can you tell us a little more about your father? He suffered an aneurysm, and then what happened?
well, I nursed him while he was in our home. This is when this something appeared to our little boy, and he could see something in the home. But after my father left, that never happened again. It was the end. I think God led us to the point where we could realize we cannot be presumptuous. We cannot think that now that we are Christians, God is going to protect us at all times. We have to pray, and we have to be prepared for things that we have to pray for protection every day. And we weren't there. We weren't doing that.
Maybe that's what the purpose of those trials were.
Maybe it was.
To teach you that you needed to
Yes.
rely on Him at all
Yes,
times.
exactly. So after that, it didn't happen again, and he grew up without any incident after that again. But there will never be a time that Satan will not try to attack us, and in whatever form. It might not be in that form, but it could be in a different form. So we were being taught constantly to be prepared, that this is not going to be an easy road.
After your father left us and went back home, we still had some interesting experiences. Remember that before we even were Christians, he lived with us for 3 years. And he moved in the esoteric circles. And we had many, many conversations, he and I, on these issues. He wouldn't tell me the deep details, but he did what I guess he would do to any high-ranking New Ager. And we would talk about spirit worlds, we would talk about out-of-body experiences, and all of these issues. And it's interesting that he used to explain to me that if you wanted to be successful in this, you should be a vegetarian.
Oh.
Yes, now he was not a vegetarian, but if he wanted an esoteric experience, or wanted to be involved in some esoteric experience, then he would become a vegetarian for that time period. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as successful. And I found that very fascinating. And I asked him how it works and what does one do. And he gave me a lot of pointers, and well, eventually I could actually do it. And I had many what they call oops, out-of-body experiences, which today I know are nothing other than visualization and hypnotic techniques. But they're sometimes achieved by methods which are life-threatening, dangerous. You could die. So I don't want to explain how you do it, but basically you create an oxygen deprivation in your brain, and that gives an opportunity for entities to assist you in whatever you have to do. And then by, shall we say, visualizing and hypnotic implantation, you have a whole new experience. You're living in a different world. You're not on this, you're not part of this world. You can be celestial, you can move between spheres, you can pass through walls, and this is so real that people will say it's insane. But I could go and look, for example, what our baby was doing in the next room. If he cried, did he lose his bottle? Does there something? I could just go and have a look without doing it. But that was an implant. It's a visualization. And these techniques are incredibly effective, but scary. And what scares me even more is that many of these techniques have been hidden in religious garbs and are entering the churches. And I've been there. I know what this was all about. I mean, this whole issue of looking at auras and evaluating people and seeing where you fit in, or connecting with spirit entities, that was part and parcel of what we were about. So this is an experience that I wouldn't want anyone to emulate. They shouldn't go there. But after my father-in-law left, he obviously felt very weak. Now, if you move in those circles and you have been entrusted with certain literature which is not for general consumption, then when you die or when you feel that you are getting there, you have to return those books to the guardian sources. But he couldn't walk properly anymore because he'd lost part of his feet with the aneurysm. He should have actually lost his legs, but they saved them by implanting veins and new arteries, and surgery is marvelous these days. But at one point he was very weak, and he felt he had to return all these things, and he didn't know how to do this. So he approached me and said, would I help him to take some books to a certain temple? And they were large numbers of books. Now, some of these books I knew. Some of them were pretty general books, like Bridges and Alice A. Bailey books and, occult books, but general books. But some of them were probably of a higher order. And so I went and fetched my eldest son, Martin, and I said to him, let's help Grandpa to take these books back to wherever. I didn't even know where we were going, right? And so we packed them all in a car. They were heavy boxes. And then he drove us to this place, huge house. And we entered into the house, and I didn't know exactly what we were doing. I thought he was taking back books. And as we carried these books into this place, I realized, oh, I know where I am now. I'm in a New Age temple. The whole structure inside was arranged like a triangle. Everything was purple, lush, purple carpets, loudspeakers coming down from and microphones coming down from the ceiling, sort of as people would sit and gather there. And this was the home of the channel for Africa. So this is the one who communicates with the ascended masters. And I, of course, knew that these communications took place because we'd had discussions, but I'd never been actually in contact at that level. And I met the man who was this master, or this channel, and he automatically assumed that I was part and parcel of the system because I was with my father-in-law. And I saw my father-in-law felt very uncomfortable. But I said to my son, we are on dangerous ground, because I'd been there, presumptively going into places like when I went to his home one day and had these attacks, and I thought, I need special protection here. So I said to my son, let's say a quiet prayer. And we said a prayer. And then I waited as we took up all the boxes for him to speak to him. And then this man came to us and he wanted to know who we were, and said, this is my father-in-law. And he asked us all kinds of questions. And he talked to me as though I was an insider. And I thought, well, this is an opportunity to find out a little bit more. And I asked him what he does, and he says, oh, I'm the channel, etc., etc. And I said, and who do you talk to? I mean, what's your clientele? And he said to me, top medical people. He gave me a list. I cannot remember the list, it's so many years ago, but he gave me I remember some of the names on the list, but I'm not going to mention them. Let's just say high government officials, high medical officials, top people in the sports arena, on national level. That was the clientele. And then he took me to a library, and my father-in-law was getting incredibly uncomfortable. And eventually he started talking, and I played along. And then he told me that he has contact not only with the high officials in Africa, but internationally. And he showed me letters from, well, let's say very, very high, shall we say the highest, people, presidents, prime ministers from European countries and countries across the waters from European countries, and he showed me their letters. And it was fascinating because it was things like, thank you for the channeled information, we'll take this into cognizance. So here was evidence from what we had experienced that the presidents of the world and the leaders of the world were actually using occult information to run their governments. And this was very fascinating, and to see it with signatures, very interesting. So then when we left, my father-in-law was very quiet, and then he said to me, you milked that man. He was disgusted. But that was my sort of first introduction to what happens behind the scenes politically, etc., with the esoteric world. And we know that the presidents of the world use occultism and communicate with spirit worlds. I mean, this is all part and parcel of my lecture series by now. So these are real things.
So how did you get involved in lecturing? Did you use this information? Did you just start right away sharing this information?
Well, now for the first time I actually had a connection, right? I had a connection to the occult world. I had the basic writings I'd read, like Alice A. Bailey and all of these books. I'd read all of those and had some of these experiences, but I'd never been involved in evangelism. And then I met my good friend, Francois Duplessis, who was an evangelist. And he actually came to visit us when we were on the farm still. And when we moved back, and I was again involved with the university, he asked me whether I could come and help him in his evangelistic campaigns. And we had amazing experiences. He had been transferred and he was senior pastor of Helderberg, the big church there. But his mind is set on evangelism. And so we started campaigns in cities or towns. One of the first ones we did was Paarl. That's a little wine town in South Africa. And another one was in Parow, which is sort of central to the suburbs of Cape Town. And then we did Cape Town itself. We actually had campaigns in the Nico Malan Theatre, which is the great opera house. And I still remember that. It started off with huge storm, unbelievable storm, rain showers, trees being ripped out, roads being blocked on that day when we were supposed to start this campaign. And we got to the Nico Malan and we thought, nobody's going to come. We'd advertised the lectures, we'd done everything we needed, and he was the main speaker. And then these storms and this rain and this wind, hurricane winds, trees all over. Nobody's going to come. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. Very well.
And what happened? We had to repeat it. We filled the Nico Malan Theatre twice in one session. We had to repeat those sessions. And these were interesting experiences, but then it got very close to home. So when I got back from the university in the evenings, I would drive from where to where was it? It was from Somerset West then.
To Paarl.
To Paarl, which is about 50, 60 kilometers. Then in the evening, we would do this campaign in Paarl, but tremendous opposition. Because if you're going to do a campaign with the doctrines of Adventism, you're going to expect opposition. And of course the churches of the town, they had a powerful hold, and so we had tremendous opposition. But be that as it may, I still want to say, there's only one denomination in the entire world that can publicly defend its doctrines on a public platform. Nobody else can do that, because you have to have the Bible, and when you defend a doctrine, you need the Word of God. But the experience that we had, unbelievable. Why did he choose Paarl? Paarl had an Adventist presence and had a little Adventist church, but there was nobody in the church anymore. Things had gone wrong, people had lost interest. There were only about three old people.
3 old people and a few.
Yeah, 3 old couples, and they were over 80. And all the young people had gone. And so Francois started first by gathering all the backsliders. And then he said to me, you must prepare them so that this church is ready, that when we give public lectures, that people can, relate to that. This is this terrible situation. So you go and give them some evening lectures. So I thought, what am I going to do? So I thought, all right, I'll recap Revelation for them. That was very fascinating. Got to this place, went to this church. My first involvement in actually teaching people, preaching, but I just did a Bible study. Now all these people that had been in the church or not in the church were there, but I didn't realize that some of them were tremendously antagonistic towards the church. The one man, he wasn't an Adventist, he was a non-Adventist, but he was married to an Adventist, and nobody had ever been able to talk to him because he hated anybody that talked on the issue. So when pastors went to visit him, he would throw things at them. He would grab anything, pots, pans. He would throw them at them. And one stage he was on top of a roof, and the pastor came to visit, and he got so angry he ripped the shingles off the roof and threw the pastor with him. And this person was in these lectures that I was giving, and I thought, he had just lost it somewhere along the line. And so I treated him quite harshly when he said, it's not like this, it's like that. And I would say to him, look here, stop your stupid argument, that's what it says here in the Bible there. And it was a major thing. And I always had very little time. I was working at the university and I only had this block of time and I had to prepare these people. And Francois was a hard taskmaster. And I had one very funny experience. I was going to give them this lecture and this elderly gentleman, we prayed one evening. Can you tell that story? That was so funny.
Oh yes. We were praying in little groups for the campaign that was coming up, and I was with this older lady. She must have been in her 80s, and we always pray, that the Lord would bless the meetings and bring people to the meetings. And she was praying, oh dear Lord, please let no one come to the meetings. We don't want anybody to come and disturb our peace. So it was very strange.
This was the type of person that was attending. And then I had prepared a preparatory lecture, and this elderly gentleman, he must have been quite heavy in the past, but he lost a lot of weight, and he had suspenders on, and his pants was a little wider than it should be. And he said he wanted to make an announcement before I started. Could he please make an announcement? So I said, okay, but we don't have much time. He says, no, that's fine. And he went up onto the stage. And I don't want to be disrespectful to elderly people, right? So he went onto the stage and he made his announcement. And he made his announcement. And he made his announcement. And it was 5 minutes, and it was 10 minutes, and it was 15 minutes, and it was 20 minutes, and he was just carrying on. And nobody was listening to what he was saying anyway. And I was sweating, and I thought, now I'm going to get rid of him. I can't just go up there and say, get off, what's this business of such long announcements? You just said you were going to say something, but I was too, I don't know, he was old and I was young, and who was I to go and chase him off? So I was sitting there and I said, oh Lord, please just do something. Just get rid of him. I don't know how. I can't just go and chase him off the stage. And while he was talking, the next minute, we just all hear pop, 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 pop. And all the buttons on all his suspenders fell off. They all shot off. And his pants fell like brick. And what did he have underneath?
He had a nice long underpants with red dots.
So he grabs his pants, he pulls it back up, and he ran off the stage. So ever since then, if I really need help, I pray, Lord, I want that angel.
The naughty angel.
The naughty angel. He must come and help me. Anyway, we finally started the campaigns there. But what then transpired was just unbelievable. Opposition like you cannot believe. And Francois started with archaeology, and I had some lectures in another venue on health issues. So we had two different crowds. And remember, this is just in the transition period of apartheid. So the country is very racist at that stage, and the mindsets of people are very racist. And now we're having a campaign in a multicultural setting. Had never happened before in South Africa. You wouldn't do that. You would talk to whites in one venue, you would talk to blacks in another venue, you would talk to coloreds in another venue, but never the three shall mix. Never. And Francois and I, we thought about it and said, this is ridiculous. God's word is not race-bound. There's no salvation by pigmentation. Whoever, every tribe and nation and culture is entitled to hear the word of God. So we had multicultural meetings. And prejudice was high. Some people, when they came in, saw that there were people of different color, whoa, they immediately left. But be that as it may, finally, we got 60 people into that church. 60 people. But some of these people were highly racist, and highly prejudiced. And so they were arguing amongst themselves that how can we meet together with people of different color? I mean, Darwin has really messed up this world, and some people go as far as to say that some races cannot be of human lineage. They must. It was very bad. It was very bad indeed. And so we had some core of people in this group now that had that mindset. And they were indoctrinating all the others that we had to get rid of the other races because, number one, they don't dress like we do. I was in the meeting where all this was addressed. They don't dress like we do. They will not be able to use the Bible like we use it, knowing verse and chapter and all of that. They will not sing like we do because they have a different rhythm, and they won't be able to sing hymns like the Europeans sing the nations, and these were the arguments.
Ridiculous.
Totally ridiculous. And while I was preaching one day, Francois told me I must take a sermon. I was preaching, and I walked to the front and sat in the front like everyone else does and started the proceedings, and we did the introductory hymns, and everybody was in the church. And the people that had come into the church were not black people. There were white people and there were colored people. That was already a problem. So if black people had come in, it would have been even a greater problem, right? During the hymns, a lady walks in the back, but she's a black lady. And every eye in that place goes, what's this? She's dressed immaculately. Immaculately. She walks, looks for an open place, sits down in the pew. Sing a hymn. She gets up, she sings it in a crystal clear voice, no hymnal in her hand. In those days, there weren't overhead projectors that projected a hymn on the screen. You had a hymnal or you knew it off by heart.
And the language was Afrikaans.
Ah, that's another thing.
And that is very rare that a black person in those days could speak Afrikaans.
And she sang it perfectly. No accent. Now, I was in the front and I was looking at her, and you sat where? You sat behind her.
Yeah.
Okay. So already, they don't dress like we do, was destroyed. She was immaculate. They can't sing like we do, they won't know the hymns, wiped out. 10,000 times better than anybody else, crystal clear voice. And I thought, well, she just happens to know that hymn. Sang the next hymn. She knew it. She stood up, no hymnal in her hand, perfect.
All the verses.
Every single verse.
Mm-hmm.
And all eyes on this lady. So I delivered my sermon. Now, the church had a passage down the middle. There were side doors, but they didn't lead anywhere. You had to still go past the front to get out. And after the sermon, as the custom is, the one who preaches walks out first and then greets the people as they come out the door. Now, I'm fascinated. I watched her throughout this sermon, and I thought to myself, I want to know why she's here. Because there are black churches. Why didn't she go to a black church? Why did she come to this church? Where is she from? What is her story? And everybody comes out, and I greet everyone, and she doesn't come out. And I say to Sonica, where is she? She must still be inside. I want to go and talk to her. So I go inside the church. She's not there. She didn't come out. Nobody saw her again. She was just God. There's no way she could have come past us. It's impossible. So who was she? So that was our first experience. It's interesting that the guy in the blue overall that spoke to you,
It was a colored man.
he was a colored man. He was not a white man. And here was a black woman. So what is God showing? He's no respecter of person. He's no respecter of race. These are important lessons. Because if you're going to preach in that culture and you sympathize in any way with that mindset, then you are doing an injustice to God's word. So we were trained very early on. And in that campaign too, we had to realize that we were not fighting flesh and blood. And we had another fascinating, actually two. The first one was, because we had separate venues, Francois had a different audience to what I had. And Francois visited a man who was in his audience, and his wife, unbeknown to anything, was in my audience. But she didn't know what denomination we were from, but she found out that Francois was a Seventh-day Adventist. So when he visited her home, she brought tea and she put it on the floor, and she said to him, "You can drink your tea from the floor like a dog, because you're a Seventh-day Adventist. I won't serve you." So she was very antagonistic. And eventually, her husband wanted to join, and she said, "If you join, we're through." So he never joined. But then my stream also went through and also ended up with the biblical truths, and she realized that this is the truth. So she apologized to her husband. But he was now vindictive, so he said to her, "If you join, we're separated." And so she and her daughter decided to join, and she tried to make amends, but nothing. So he said to her, "Out of the bedroom. You're not sleeping in this bedroom anymore." So she was sitting in the other bedroom, and she was crying and thinking about these issues. Is it right? Is it wrong? When she heard a voice which said to her, calling her name. And so she thought it was him. He had had second thoughts. So she went to the bedroom and wanted to ask him, what's the problem, or what did he want? And he was snoring. He was fast asleep. So she went back to the spare room. She heard the voice again. She got up. She looked out the window. Who's calling her? Nobody. She went back to bed. And the next thing, she hears her name again, and she says, "Yes." And then she, almost like in a vision, sees 2 tablets of stone. And the voice says to her, "Keep the commandments." That's one incident in there. Another man, while we were doing the campaign, he's actually a good friend of mine now. He was a Dutch Reform man. He was actually a deacon in the church. He phones me, and he's in a total flap. And he says to me, this is now before they are in the church, they're still attending lectures. He says to me, "Something terrible has happened." I said, "What happened?" I said, "I found Francois Duplessis." But a woman answered, and she screamed at me at the top of her voice and said, "I've got him where I want him. I've got him where I want him. I've destroyed him. He's on the floor. I've finished him off," and then laughed with this horrible voice. He was fear-struck. "What's going on there?" I said, "I don't know. I'll find out." So he puts the phone down. Now he's phoning from Paarl to me. I'm in Somerset West. Francois is in Parow, which is all pretty far apart. So I phone him, and lo and behold, this woman answers. Now, I've got the phone, and this woman is screaming in the phone that you could hear it how far away?
Probably about 10 meters.
And you could hear
I
that
could hear the screaming.
She was screaming and laughing and saying, "I've got him where I want him. I've got him destroyed. I've finished him off." I got such a fright. It was a horrible voice, like a demon screaming in the phone. I put the phone down, and I thought, you're confused at that stage. Is this a wrong number? What's going on? Same experience as this other person. Pick up the phone again. I phone the number again, and Francois' wife answers. And I said, was there a phone call just now to your house? Is there someone else at your house? No, and she starts crying on the other side and tells me Francois is sitting on the floor and he's not getting up. So I'm thinking, okay. I said, we're coming. Just keep calm, we're coming. I grabbed my wife, I grabbed the kids, we put them in the car, we rushed through to Francois. Here he's sitting on the floor in his study. He's not moving. He's totally depressed, he's totally finished. And I said to him, what happened? He says, no, I can't carry on. This is too much for him. Whatever, he's totally depressed. And so we pray for him and we ask God to give him strength to carry on, because he has to give the next lecture that evening. But he can't get up. He can't move. His back or whatever.
His back went into spasm. He can't get up. Move.
So he's not a very heavy man, so I pick him up and we put him on a chair, and nothing happens. And we prayed about it. And then it's time that we must go, we must travel, we must go and do this campaign. And he's in this state. So we carry him to the car, we put him in the car, he's in a hunched position. He's sitting like this, he can't move. We drive through to Paul. We get him up onto the pulpit and he can't stand. So he's sitting hunched on the floor. And people are coming in. And we're praying like crazy. And he starts his lecture hunched. And he talks so softly because he's got no strength. And as he talks, it comes right. And he gets up. And it's absolutely normal. And the other thing that happened during that Paul campaign, because I always traveled from Somerset West to Paul, and you travel through no man's land between the two cities from where I was traveling. And every single night, when I finished the campaign, she didn't always come with me because it was evenings and we have little children and she had to take care of them. So I used to travel backwards and forwards. And every night, when I came back from the campaign at exactly the same spot, in the middle of nowhere, my car would stop. The lights would go off, the engine would die, and I'd have to drift off the road and stand next to the road. Now, there are no cell phones in those days. There's no way you can communicate with anyone. You'd have to walk for kilometers to get to the nearest house. So here I stand in the middle of nowhere. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? And then I pray, and I think, what am I going to do? I'm going to wait for a car and see what happens. Nobody comes by. It's late at night. And then 15 minutes sometimes, 10 minutes, 20, sometimes an hour later, lights come on. Engine stops. No problem. Drive on. Now the same thing every night. Now, if it happens in any spot, that's one thing. You have a faulty connection in your car, there's a wire loose or something heats up at the same spot.
That's more than coincidence.
That's not coincident. So I'm being fortified now. This is not just a story. This is not a fairy tale. This is a real war. You are fighting real entities. Later on, of course, you get conditioned when you get to that spot. I'm getting close to this spot. What's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And then one day, during the day, we'd done the sermon, and it was a Sabbath, wasn't it a Sabbath? It was a Sabbath day. We'd finished the sermon. I'd done the sermon. We were driving home. I already told her this is where things happen. And so, all right, I'll tell the story. We're driving along, and I'm getting to the spot, and I say to her and to the kids, but this is where it always happens, where the car stops. But there's a dog sitting in the road. I don't know, what kind of dog was it?
Like a black Labrador,
Nice dog.
lab.
He's sitting in the road. It's a big dog, and he's sitting in the opposite lane to where I'm driving, at exactly that spot. So I say to myself, I'm going to slow down and be very, very careful, because I don't trust this place. This dog's going to run in front of me and I will hit it, and I don't want to hit this dog. So I slow right down. But there's a car, like a truck, coming from the front, and he's moving. And it's like a four-wheel drive. It's got high wheels, and he's moving. And I'm looking inside, and I'm thinking, what's this guy doing? He's moving like crazy, and he's heading straight for the dog. And I'm thinking, is he going to slow down? What's the dog going to do now? The dog's either going to run into the field, or the dog is going to run in front of me. So I've slowed down, and I've slowed down to the point that I'm opposite the dog when this truck hits that dog. You cannot believe it. The dog was just destroyed. Now I've got hysterical kids in my car because they've witnessed this. I've got a hysterical wife in my car. I'm fuming because this person must have seen that dog. He was sitting there. This is disgusting, and I'm furious. So I whip the car around, and I'm going to chase this guy down. I'm going to give him blazes. I'm really angry. And I race after this car. And what did you see in the car?
We couldn't see anything in the car. There was no head, nothing, but it was tinted, the glass was tinted, but still we could see no movement, nothing. And there was a four-way stop. As we turned, there was a four-way stop, so this person would have had to stop at the four-way stop. But as we came to the four-way stop, there was nothing. There was not a car that way or ahead of us.
There's no way it could
nothing.
go, because he was right in front of us. I turned right round, was right behind him. At the four-way stop, he was gone.
And we were trying to see what kind of person was this, and we couldn't see anything inside the car. And that made us even more scared.
So this was weird experiences.
Very weird. So why did all these dramatic things happen to you? It doesn't happen to everybody.
Well, I'm a scientist, right? I think like a scientist. It's either black or it's white. It's up or it's down. Evidence, result. Experiment, result, conclusion. That's the way it works for a scientist. I was thrown into a different world here. You know, what's even more amazing, actually, is that when I was an atheist, I was perfectly happy in the occult world, doing all these out-of-body experiences, all these things. I actually say there is no such thing as an atheist. There is only someone who doesn't believe in a personal God. Because an atheist, to me today, doesn't mean you believe nothing. It means you believe anything, except the truth. So here I was confronted with things that my naturalistic thinking could not explain. The opposition that we experienced was demonic, directly demonic. But Satan uses people as well. When Francois was so terribly depressed, I didn't know what flack he was taking up behind the scenes. I just had my experience. But he didn't explain to me what his trials were. He had trials with opposition from the pastors and the ministers from the other churches, who would publish things and talk lies about the doctrines, and that Adventists are, who knows, cannibals, or child sacrifices, because, terrible things happened, like that dingo story in Australia, and terrible labels being attached to Adventists, and he had confronted these ministers. And he was even receiving opposition from within, because outside puts pressure on the inside put pressure on him, and he cracked under the pressure. And then he was still having me involved in all of this, and he had so many troubles and so many concerns that he cracked under the pressure. But God helped him through. He should You should get him to tell you some of his experiences, amazing experiences that he had too. If you're going to evangelize, if you're going to confront lies with data, with truth, you can't just have data. You need to believe that this is a real war and that this was training. This was right in the beginning. This was nothing other than training.
I think that that's an important lesson for our viewers as well, because we are all experiencing trials. We're all experiencing opposition and difficulties, and we need to remember that it is a war. And that's one thing I actually really like about you. I've known you for a long time as our friend, and that's something that I've noticed about you. Every time there's trouble, every time there's opposition or anything like that, you always recognize it right away. That is the war, and you pray. And I think many people sometimes forget it, that they need to be constantly in prayer and leaning on God.
Not that God requires it. God knows what the problem is going to be.
But we require it.
We require it. Yes, we require it. Yeah. We need to know we are dependent, lest we become presumptuous and arrogant.
But didn't the biblical people in the Bible also encountered all these trials, and it's not unusual. It's part of our walk with God.
But another important point I think we need to remember is that these trials happen when you start doing something. There's a lot of people who aren't doing anything and their life is very peaceful.
Have no experience.
Yes.
With God.
Yeah, they don't have these experiences unless they step out in faith and actually try to oppose the forces.
That's right. But this time period with Francois was a time period in training. And if I take the entire time period, it was over 3 years. And you don't just start out by yourself. And then, out of the blue, the conference decided to transfer Francois way before he should be transferred. And where did they transfer him to? Out in the sticks in the middle of nowhere, as far as possible away from where we were. We were so upset. We tried to prevent it. We wrote petitions. The churches wrote petitions. Nothing moved. He was gone. He was taken out of circulation, stuck in the middle of nowhere. And there were campaigns to be run. Who was going to run them? Me. Now, I'd never given his lectures. He used to give the doctrinal lectures. I lectured on issues of health. That's another story. We must get into how we got into the health work in the first place. But that's a different story. We can talk about that in another session. Now I had to start doing evangelism by myself. How was I going to do that? And remember, I had no money. I was deep in debt from that horrendous farm experience. My salary went into mortgages, and we didn't even have a house that was ours or anything to live in. We were just trying to make ends meet. And so Francois had left me his English series of slides. So my first idea was, I have to copy these slides, but where do I get money to buy the film? Everything was, Kodak type film, rolls. Where am I going to get money? And so what I would do is I would go to the places where they sell these films and buy the big rolls, but I couldn't afford them new, and I couldn't even afford them old, so I'd look for the out-of-date, past sell-by date ones and get them at a very reasonable price. But even so, they were a problem. And then in my spare time at the university, I'd use the dark room to copy every single slide, to photograph it in the right setting and make copies of all of his slides. So then I could actually build up my own evangelistic series. But it was painful financially. But the interesting thing is, I would have to spend our money for food. And there were times when we had no food, nothing. I remember when we came back and there was no food on the table. Do you remember what happened? You tell that story.
Well, it was lunchtime and we had absolutely nothing. Maybe not even a bottle of peanut butter, nothing. And we had the 3 children to feed, and Walter said, let's sit down at the table and we'll pray. And so we prayed and we said, thank you. He prayed, thank you, Lord, for the food that you will provide for us. And the phone rang exactly as he said, amen. The phone rang and the lady said, have you been to your front door? And we said, no, we came in through the back door. And she said, go to your front door. And as I opened the door, there was this box, probably this big, just full of vegetables and fruits and bread and spreads and anything that you can imagine. And so we had a lunch.
Where did it come from?
Somebody had left it there, and not even knowing that we were struggling. They didn't know, but
God knew.
But God knew. And he knew that day, specifically that day, we would be without food. And so we were very happy.
And the kids were still sitting around the table. I just said amen. The phone rang. She went there. She put it on the table. And the kids' eyes were this big.
Yes. And that strengthened their faith, because their life was also not very easy. We yanked them out of school, out of public school, became Adventists. Suddenly they couldn't do sport on Sabbath. Suddenly they couldn't go and do ballet and do cricket. My oldest son was cricket captain in the cricket team, and suddenly he lost everything. It was tough on them. And now we're struggling financially, and they were thinking, what kind of God is this, who's supposed to take care of us? And these little things strengthened their faith. We could see how it helped them through that time.
Yeah, but be that as it may, when I then gave these lectures in the evening and I'd spent our food money on buying film to make these copies, it just so happened that somebody would slip me something. And it was always more or less the amount that I'd just spent. Not more, not huge amounts, just enough to cover that. And the next time I would have to then again buy more film to do the next lectures, right? Then I'd have to spend our food money again and buy this, and he would give it back. I can say that every single cent that I spent in that cause was returned to me, piece by piece. Nobody said, well, how do I solve your problem? How many, nothing like it. Just as you need it. Just as you need it. And that was training as well.
We'll take a break now. Thank you for joining us. And we will return with more fascinating stories of Walter and Sonica's life as God has led them. Thank you for joining us.